Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Never Peak Project Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Ranger, and in today's episode, we are welcoming another fantastic guest to the podcast. And it's really just continuing on the series that Arkansas had some of the best people from my walk. That's not a judgment against any other state. It's just the fact that I have had more people from Arkansas than really any other state on the podcast. And I think California would be the close second, only because I live here. As I kind of mentioned before in my interview last time with Ty King from the Arkansas Podcast Collaborative, when I was walking from the border all the way into Little Rock, I was very concerned about that space from Mississippi and Arkansas over to around Little Rock area, just because there was nothing in between. Then I later found out quickly that there is a lot in between, and that a lot is fantastic people. And thankfully, that carried on into my time actually in Little Rock, Arkansas. If you have been following the podcast for a while, or you just kind of want to scroll back in the audio feed, I did an interview with a woman named Ashley from the Venture Center about what the Venture Center does, their economic and entrepreneurship support for small businesses in the area. While I was there, I got to meet a few other people of the team, got to kind of know some folks, shake some hands, kiss some babies. And one of the people I talked to while I was there, I think she followed me or I followed her on socials. And I kind of just kept up with her journey as I was finishing up mine. After I finished the walk, I was in Greece with my fiance and her family. I was scrolling through Instagram, just kind of checking out what everybody was doing. I saw something very interesting, which was a workshop series, which was literary or artistic analysis of Taylor Swift compared to other cultural phenomena, other art, music, movies, etc. And I thought that was insane. So I looked at it a little bit more, and I realized it was the gal that I had followed from the Venture Center in Arkansas. So kind of piecing everything back together, looking at everything she was doing, I realized that she is way more than just a Swiftie. That is what we're going to talk a little bit about today, is the powerhouse of community, of networking, of just really building a personal brand. That's kind of the way that I view her. So that is why today I am so excited to introduce our guest, Viktoria Capek.
Ranger, I am so honored, and I truly have no idea how to even speak or follow that introduction. I'm feeling really, really good. You really kind of boasted me up, and I'm super excited to talk to you today. Thank you so much for wanting me on. And yeah, I was super impressed after I met you when you did stop at the Venture Center, and stoked that you reached out to want to carry on the conversation and just get to know you a little more. I guess you're getting to know me, but it works both ways.
Awesome, Victoria. I super appreciate you taking the time to, again, get to know me to get to know you, and my audience get to kind of learn from you, and you get to kind of share your magic with our listeners. But could you just kind of share a little bit about your journey, who you are, a little bit about what we talked about in the pre-show, just kind of give our listeners an idea of who you are and why they should continue to listen?
Yeah, a loaded question. Like you said, a Swiftie, yes, but a lot of other things on top of that. So, as you mentioned, I currently live in Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm actually from the Atlanta, Georgia area, and I moved around a bit from Georgia to Minnesota, down to Arkansas, out to Los Angeles. So I was in your neck of the woods in California. And back out to Arkansas, actually, believe it or not. I know not many people choose to go back to Arkansas once they were there, but I did, because of the community I fell in love with here. We can talk about that a little bit later, because it sounds like you had a similar experience. But my background is in journalism. I used to be a news anchor and reporter, and that's kind of what took me around the country to a few different areas. And I love that. I love storytelling. I grew up in the arts and in theater, and I was able to really kind of carry that passion over into journalism and into storytelling. Through that avenue, I was able to explore a couple of different things that I found out I enjoyed, such as social media. I was able to find a really big community I was able to connect with on social media, because I started posting about my journey as a news anchor and how I was queer and how I am queer, and what that experience of being a news anchor in the South and being an openly queer person was like. I was able to meet so many amazing people because of that. And I sort of let that journey carry me into a new chapter of my life post news. I ended up doing a little bit of backpacking around Europe, kind of finding more of my queer identity and who I was in my 20s. I let it carry me over to USC in Los Angeles. I pursued a master in arts journalism so I could do more storytelling in art analysis and in culture and getting to know different cultures and figuring out how to raise their voices up. And then I let it bring me back to Arkansas, where I'm actually now living with my fiance and doing a bunch of really cool things, such as the literary crossover analysis class, an art analysis class that you mentioned with Taylor Swift's music, a super exciting community I've been able to create there. And other things like creating Hairpins, which is a pop-up for queer and lesbian women in Arkansas. The Venture Center, of course, getting to work with entrepreneurs and very passionate people is something that drives my passions and the things that I'm hoping to do with my life. And now I'm just rambling at this point. So there's so many avenues we could take. Please pick one of them and tell me which direction to go. I'm begging you.
Yeah, of course. And I think that giving us that bird's eye view of so many different aspects of who you are, again, it's what I've noticed is so interesting is how easy it is for people to just hook onto one or two pieces of our identity, and that's how they kind of know us. Like when I was in college,
Yeah.
the people in the fraternity knew me as Ranger, the kind of go happy, lucky, I don't know, struggles in school but has a good time, right? And then in my Toastmasters
Mm-hmm.
group, they knew me as the little ag and farm boy. And, like all these different pieces of our identity that kind of are just small pieces, but really add up to the overall whole. And I think
Yeah.
the one that I'm interested in to kind of start us off on is the way that I kind of might see like a piece of you and a piece of me might be similar. And it's that aspect of kind of like that travel around the US aspect. So when you
Yeah.
say that you were
Yeah.
able to kind of jump all over the place and see different, I don't know, like was it specifically for reporting on the news and seeing what was going on in different areas, or what was the drive for
Yeah.
that travel specifically?
Totally. I mean, I was born and raised, I did undergrad in Georgia, and pretty much after I finished college, I knew I wanted to go work elsewhere. And so I am so lucky that I was one of the few that was able to land a reporting job straight out of undergrad. And it took me just 5 weeks later from graduation up to Duluth, Minnesota. So right there on Lake Superior, which was a total life change, a culture change, a climatic change. You can imagine from the south to the almost Canadian north. So that was some
Yeah.
cold days and cold winters I had there. And so I was able to kind of do work there with the station I was at the time. And then coming down to Arkansas was also driven by being offered a position at the station I worked at here in Little Rock, KATV. So I did 2 years here. Going out to Los Angeles was driven by my master's program. So, kind of still journalism, right? I wanted to follow the arts scene in Los Angeles and get that arts and culture writing experience in a place that was thriving with arts and culture. And then finally, I was not driven by journalism when I came back to Arkansas. I was driven by love, which is so different and such a cliche, but it's true. And I'm here and I've had a lot of really cool experiences because of it. So a lot of just jumping around to different stations and following the opportunities is what I would say moved me around the United States.
Gotcha. So how interesting. I think that that's really fascinating. I think that being able to kind of jump around to very different like microclimates or microcultures, but in such different areas.
Mm.
Because on my walk, I felt like I could kind of see the evolution of culture over time. And I think if I really
Hmm.
sat down and wrote it out, I'd be able to see that more clearly. But like being in the U.S. South for the most part, for a vast majority of my walk until I got to like New Mexico, Arizona area, like it was relatively the same. So I'm just curious, when you were kind of traveling around, did you notice any differences or similarities between the people and the cultures? And how did that affect you?
Definitely. Yeah, I guess I would have to say the most experience I had with that would be between Arkansas and my time in Los Angeles. My time in Minnesota, I think, was kind of clouded by first big girl job. It was very based in the work I was doing there because I was all in. You know, in your first job too, you kind of have to hustle, right? Like I don't know if you know this, but reporters when they start out make very low money. So I was out there, I was hustling, I was working a second job. And so because of that, I don't think I got to connect with that community as much as I wish I could have. I dream of going back to Duluth, Minnesota every single day. Again, a different conversation. But at least the communities and the cultures that I met in Arkansas and in California were so vastly different. Arkansas, I call home to truly my queer community and the first community that made me feel confident in being myself, which I feel like might shock a lot of people because I feel like you think Arkansas, you think the South, you're not immediately going to think LGBTQ friendly. And I didn't either. That was until I really got to start meeting the people behind the community here, behind the label. And I figured out some of the queer history based in Arkansas. And I got involved with the drag scene and meeting a lot of the drag performers around the state, going as far as being able to judge the Miss Gay America Arkansas pageant, which was so cool. I was able to really kind of see the extent of the community in Arkansas as more than a stereotype, and really got to feel what I think was true Southern hospitality more than what I experienced being in Georgia. Even though Georgia is technically more far south, I think because I was Atlanta adjacent, it sort of had that big city vibe to it at times, right? Because Atlanta is always this city I hear as being on the up and up. So that was what stood out about the Arkansas and Little Rock community. It truly embraced me with open arms. And that's part of the reason that being back has felt so much like really coming home. Los Angeles and California, also kind of a unique and different experience. So I was out there for a 10-month master's program, which is insane. It basically took 2 years of a program smashed into 10 months. So you can imagine how crazy busy I was out there. And then going to, yeah, I know, same. I look back and I'm like, I don't know how I survived, but I did it. Yeah. That was a wild time, Ranger. But you know, kind of being at USC too, I struggled a little bit with the microcosmic community that I was around at USC. I'll throw it out there. People call it the University of Spoiled Children, and they don't call it that for no reason. That to say, there were some really awesome people there. I met one of my absolute best friends there, Grace Murray. She's literally going to be a bridesmaid in my wedding. And she is truly like, yeah, anyways, I could gush about Grace all day long, but it's you know, any community you're going to find the good ones too. So when I was able to break off of USC's campus, not saying that everyone there was what they, you know, not saying everyone there had their noses up, but when I was able to break off of USC's campus and really meet the communities of people who they're not going out to the clubs every single weekend and spending, you know, tons of cash, but they're having variety shows in alleyways and in their backyards, and they're bringing together groups of people. That experience to me was different in the sense that I had only experienced community building like that in a Southern way. So getting to see that those types of people existed in California and had to almost fight more for it in such a hustling, bustling, down to the grind place. I really appreciated it. And I really appreciate those people. And I still am in contact with a lot of those people as well. So those were kind of the standout experiences from those communities.
So yeah, just really being able to see that what is it, like the culture is so different, but there's so many, like there's a lot of parallels in between each section, it sounds like, or at least in your experience of those cultures.
Yeah, it was super cool to really see any place you go, whether it is the North, South, it is Los Angeles, it is New York, and those hustling, bustling cities. At the end of the day, we're all looking for community, and to see that those kinds of people who build up those microcosms and those groups exist everywhere. I don't know. It's just something that really makes you appreciate the people you meet in every corner of the country and really every corner of the world.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. I know a big part of what I want to talk to you today about was specifically around community and creating those spaces where people do feel welcome, or as though they're part of a unit, of a tribe, community, club, whatever you want to call it. So when it comes to building up the community for those that are part of the LGBTQ community, how did you take those lessons from these different parts of the US and bring it into Little Rock? Because it sounds like it was fairly strong already, but how have you kind of added to that strength?
Definitely a good question. So it's so funny because I mentioned, in my little introduction, Hairpins is this kind of pop-up bar night that my fiance and I created specifically for lesbians and queers, but of course that's also open to transgender and non-binary individuals. Really, we're trying to expand a space specifically for queer non-men. And as open as I found the queer community in Little Rock, the trend that I've noticed around the country is that queer spaces are still generally geared towards gay men. And that's wonderful that we have those spaces. I think there's some statistic that's like around the United States, there's some 800 plus gay bars that, although the term gay opens up a lot of the community, still technically gay is centered towards gay men. And there are, I think now, 32 lesbian bars in the entire country. So when I actually went out to Los Angeles, I was so excited to be around this huge and what I thought was this dynamic and hustling, bustling queer community. One of the very first, I think, if not the first article that I wrote and published in LA was called Looking for Lesbians, Me Too. And it's because there were no lesbian centered bars. I couldn't find queer women literally anywhere. Especially, I tested the dating scene for like 1 month out there. Never again. My God, throw me to the wolves next time. The LA queer dating scene is power to you if you're able to handle that one. But I really struggled to find a queer women's community. And so that title was actually inspired by an art exhibit that I went to that was called Looking for Lesbians. And my goodness, I wish I could remember the artist's name. I know that she's referenced in the article that I'm talking about that I wrote here, but yeah, it was essentially that. And how specifically West Hollywood is known to be one of the kind of queer meccas of the United States. And it just doesn't extend to queer women. So in the entirety of my time being out there, I learned that the last lesbian bar in Los Angeles actually closed in 2013. So that would be 11 years ago now. And in the time that I was out there, they ended up opening not one, but two lesbian bars, which was actually a really cool experience. They opened one called the Ruby Fruit, and they opened one called Honeys, which is actually geared towards non-men specifically as well. But it really just kind of opened my eyes to, even in places like Los Angeles that are meant to be these dynamic queer hubs, that doesn't necessarily extend to queer women. That doesn't mean that the queer women don't exist. It just means that there weren't spaces for them to gather and get together and find community. So I come back to Arkansas in May of 2023, and I know that one of my priorities is finding a queer community, specifically a queer women's community. I know that that's something that's going to be really important for me out here, especially moving in with my partner at the time, now fiance. It's something we really wanted to find. So this is kind of I promise there's a point to the story. A couple months later, we end up going up to New York City and we visit Cubbyhole for the first time, which is an iconic lesbian bar up there. And what we find iconic about it is that it's just a dive bar. It's not lasers. It's not techno music. It's not clubbing. Not that those things aren't wonderful. Trust me, there's a time and place, and I love that experience. But it's literally, you walk in, it is crowded, door to window, wall to wall, and it is just a dirty little dive bar that queer women get to go to and experience and meet people and find community. And it was when we were standing in that bar that we said, this is what we need. This is the thing that we're missing specifically in Little Rock. So we were up in New York City and we were like, how do we make this happen? obviously we're not going to open a lesbian bar right now. So let's just start thinking through the dive bars that we have. And we thought of our favorite one here. It's called Whitewater Tavern. It opened in the 1970s. It's actually like a very small, kind of famous music venue through Little Rock. And we love the people there. We love the ownership. Matt White is the kind of events coordinator there. He's been a great guy. And we knew him socially a little bit at that point. And so we said, what if we had some sort of pop up at Whitewater Tavern that was for queer women? So it's a community space for queer women. It has the dive bar vibe. It's not as intensive as opening a bar. And we knew that that was what we wanted to do. So we made shit happen. And 4 months later, Matt was like, let's do it. Let's do it. We had no idea what the first one was going to be like. And we have sold out every Hairpins event since then. That's what we ended up calling it, Hairpins. And every single time we leave, Matt is looking at us, he shakes our hand, and he's just like, we have never had a presence like this in Whitewater Tavern, nor have I seen a presence of queer women like this in Little Rock for as long as he's lived here. And it's been a really, really humbling experience to get to see that grow. And we're just continuing to grow it and see how it kind of morphs, I guess, as long as we're here.
Gotcha. That's so interesting. I love the whole idea of seeing an issue, seeing where somebody else has done something similar, and putting your own spin on it to create something that is so needed and required and important. And I guess my question for you on that one is, why did you decide that it was your and your fiance's like responsibility or something you wanted to take on to do this, as opposed to kind of like waiting for someone else or waiting for something else to happen that was similar?
That's a really good question. I also ask us that. Why did we feel the need that we had to do this? We joke all the time about, um, we want our cups filled, so we just fill it ourselves. Selfishly, it's because we wanted it, right? Like we wanted to connect with this community. So we kind of, we saw occasionally things here and there that were trying to bring together queer women in the community. But my fiance Whitney and I were very ambitious, sometimes a little ambitious for our own good. And so I think it was just like one of those, let's use our powers for good, right? Like let's try and do something fun with this ability we have. I sometimes don't give myself enough credit for being what a lot of people refer to as an ultra connector. Like I am the person who's like, oh, you want to make this thing happen? Let me connect you to this person who can either connect you to someone else or who can make that thing happen. And in this instance, I used that power for us in talking to who I knew and wanting to make this go and happen. And, we both have backgrounds in marketing. So we figured, how hard can it be to start an Instagram page and go follow every person we know and make graphics ourselves and do the marketing for it ourselves and yeah, all these different things. So that's why us. I think that we just had a lot of energy and a lot of power stored up in us. And we said, let's kind of use this in a selfish way that's actually not selfish, because it's going to be a really good thing for a lot of other queer individuals.
Yeah, that's something that the last little part that you said, it reminded me of something. What is it? I use a term a lot called vaguely specific, where you
Mm.
like for a niche for coaching or for your business, like a mission statement should be vaguely specific, like just vague enough that people can bring their own meaning to it, but just specific enough that you
Mm-hmm.
get them to kind of think within certain bounds. And what that makes me think of when you say kind of, we made this for ourselves, but it's good for the community and others, is like selfishly altruistic. Like there's such a piece
Yeah.
of you that's tied into it that you want this for yourself, others can benefit from it. And I'm so glad that you defined what you meant by your superpower, because as you were saying it, I was like, what do you mean by your superpowers? What is your power? And I think that that aspect of being a super connector, it's like that's the bucket, right? Like I feel like when I think of terms like super connector or like personable. Like there's other sub skills that go in there. So like I'm
Hmm.
curious. I have my own definition of what could probably go in this bucket, but for you, like what skills lead to this like superpower? Does that make sense?
I think so. Oh man, I have a list I've recently done for my therapist who actually asked me to write down what my strengths are. So I wish I could access that list, but it's fine. What are some of the things that I think go into being a super connector? It helps that I am a fairly extroverted person, right? I don't meet a stranger. Now, that doesn't mean that perhaps I'm ambiverted, right? I do need some recharge time sometimes, don't get me wrong. But I don't go anywhere without making a friend or at least striking up a conversation with someone. Seriously, any room I walk in. And if that one other entity in the room is a rock, I'll be damned. I'll be friends with that rock by the end of that visit. So I think that that goes into being a super connector. But I think one of the things that kind of help fill that specific trait is the fact that I can't bear the idea of someone not feeling included in a space. And I think that that might come from the fact that I was ousted a lot when I was younger. I Without having to get into details, unless you want to, I was kicked out of my house when I was younger. So I was physically ousted when I was in high school. And I was also socially ousted in a lot of situations. I mean, I was a theater kid, I was an AP kid. So there were a lot of social reasons that I was ousted growing up. I was slightly overweight. So I was ousted for that because in the 2000s, that's what kids did, was make fun of you if you didn't fit a very specific mold of appearances. And so wanting to include people is something that has been a passion of mine. I think, especially since starting in journalism. You know, they always talk about how journalists' responsibility is to help the voiceless be heard or raise the voice of those who don't have a voice. And to me, that's kind of the same thing. I want to make sure people feel heard. I want to make sure people feel included. And it's because a lot of times I don't think I felt that way growing up. So being a super connector, I think what I'm just trying to do is make sure people know that there is a place where they can plug in. And a specific example of this regarding Hairpins, this queer women's pop up, is when I was out in Los Angeles. I made a very good friend, and she came out while I was out there. Later in life. So she was 29 at the time that she realized that she was queer, and she was really struggling to find a queer community outside of her friendship with me. So when I moved back to Arkansas, it was really difficult for the both of us. Actually, this past September, when my fiance and I hosted a Hairpins event here in Arkansas, I told this friend, I said, hey, do you want to come out to Hairpins in Arkansas? I will buy your plane ticket. I want to fly you out here. And I want you to see that a queer community exists. It exists for you. It might be in Arkansas. It might be 1,000, 2,000 miles away, but I want you to know that this community exists. You are going to find it. You do belong here. And it's always waiting for you whenever you want to reach out to it. So that is kind of what plays into the super connector sort of superpower. Did that even answer your question? I just went off on a tangent.
No, I think it was a vaguely an on task tangent. I think that was
Okay.
fantastic. See, I love those like the big small, right? Like that's like kind of what it is, right? Like the almost like the dichotomy. How do I say this? There's something that Alex Hermosi says, and it's like it's not a decision to be made. It's like a dichotomy to be managed. Like not so much
Mm,
as it's black or white, but it's on a spectrum of whatever it is typically, right? Which
yeah.
maybe that is a tangent in and of itself. But what I wanted to say was the things that came up for me as you were saying that were very like mission or impact driven. That you really want to be of
Mm,
service to others, and that's what I super love about this podcast is that that's something that is so prevalent. And I think that when I was doing my walk was it was prevalent everywhere, and I just love seeing how that
mm-hmm.
that basic drive to be a support or to bring in community for others, whether it's through like Western apparel from Charity, the gal I had on in New Mexico, or when I stayed with Burton in South Carolina and what he was doing with Saluda Now. Like it's just something that like is so specific all across the country. And what I guess what
Yeah.
kind of surprises me is, which maybe this can kind of start leading into the T Swift conversation almost, is that a lot of things are very male centric. And I guess I
Mm.
never realized, like, I hear gay bar and I think LGBTQ. Maybe that's just because I went to UC Davis and I have seen a lot more than most people have. But I
Yeah.
never really would have thought that, like, the gay gals needed their own space. Like, I would have thought that they would just go to the gay bar. So I think that's so interesting
Yeah.
that there's so much more to it than just this. It's like, I don't want to say you guys are like in that same category, but almost like the
Hmm.
subcategory. I feel like I'm just rambling and trying to like wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
But does that how does that resonate?
No,
Like,
it's
what am I saying in your words?
no, I hear you. And I so like, I love that this is kind of an epiphany that you're having, because I think this is a conversation now that I do think we need to be having. And it's the conversation of intersectionality, right? Like, intersectionality in every aspect of the word is so important. And it's because not one single group is a monolith, right? Like, LGBTQ is LGBTQ for a reason. It doesn't just mean gay, it means lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and then of course our other
Mm-hmm.
labels that we have as well within that. It is something that exists when we talk about um you know talking about women are straight, women are gay, women are wives, women are mothers, women are widows, women are black, women are
Mm-hmm.
Asian, women are white, women are all these different things, women are CEOs, women are stay-at-home mothers. There are all these kinds of different things, and they don't just fall under woman, right? Like, they don't just
Mm-hmm.
fall under one category. So I love that this is an epiphany you're having, because I think when it comes to the queer community specifically, talking about this difference between gay men's spaces and queer women's spaces, um, is a conversation we should be having more. And I see it happening. I do, because I am seeing kind of queer specific pop-ups happen more. I'm seeing, there was something that came out in, I want to say 2021, that's called the Lesbian Bar Project, that's tracking the amount of lesbian bars in the country. It's the super interesting media project. I suggest you look into. And that's the only reason I even know that there are so few lesbian bars in the country. But yeah, I think that's kind of what I hear you saying, is you don't really think about those intersection, and it's because we kind of just smacked one label onto it. We said gay, and when we said gay rights, like that's kind of what we gave it all to. So really realizing that every group has intersections, and intersectionality is something that we always need to be talking about, and it's always a great moment when I'm speaking with someone and they have kind of that epiphany. So yeah, you're doing great. I love it.
That's what I like to hear. When it comes to building that community, it sounds like that's a lot of the work you're doing with the LGBTQ plus community in Arkansas and across the country, which I'll get into in a second, because it's not just hairpins, it's not just the pop up or the lesbian bars. It sounds like you're also kind of bringing a lot of other people together through different interests, and that's another thing that I've noticed is
Hmm.
how like again, everybody has their own specific interests in like these small micro pieces of them. And for a lot of
Hmm.
people, and especially in culture nowadays, it looks like Taylor Swift is such a huge part of culture. She's kind of ingrained anywhere. I mean, for the people I see on like the Facebook comments, like the what is it, like infiltrating the NFL, which I'd love to see if you
Yeah.
have time. I'd love to give my thoughts on that and hear your
Oh
thoughts
boy.
on that. Oh
Oh
boy.
boy.
Oh, trust me. I want to make something very clear. I've been a Swiftie since day one. I had the CDs growing up. I listened to everything, all that kind of fun stuff. Enough about me. What you're doing with the Dear Reader Lits, I watched the last session that you recently had. You sent me over the Zoom file. I thought it was
Mm-hmm.
incredible. It was super well put together, very thoughtful, and like I said, like I just thought the whole idea of comparing her songs to other forms of art was so interesting because I feel like a lot of times we kind of just listen to music and we don't really think more beyond the beat, the rhythm. Sometimes lyrics resonate with us, sometimes they don't. But what was your
Yeah.
driving force between putting that specific project together, like the genesis of it? Like, how did you? Again, I feel like I'm rambling because I'm excited, but like, how did you even come up with the whole idea to do something as like intricate, specific, and kind of maybe silly or interesting as Dear Reader Lit?
It is all of those things, Ranger. Yeah. To kind of clear up what it is, Dear Reader is a cross analysis of Taylor Swift's music through different art forms, and it started as a literary analysis, so comparing Taylor Swift's music to classic literature like The Great Gatsby, like Romeo and Juliet, like To Kill a Mockingbird. And then this past session that I did with it was comparing her music and lyrics and visuals to actually different films. And my hope and dream is to continue this kind of art analysis through her lyrics in many different forms in many different ways, but literature and film is kind of the life it's taken right now. And the way it started was truly a connection to her lyrics, right? So I remember, Taylor Swift is on this journey of re-releasing her first six albums under the rouge of Taylor's version, right? And in 2021, Red, which is her fourth studio album, Red Taylor's version actually was released. And one of the more popular songs from that album is All Too Well, specifically the 10-minute version. So it's this beautifully and lyrically raw song that has always been a fan favorite. And the 10-minute version was no exception. The day that that song came out, specifically that evening when the All Too Well short film or music video came out to coincide with it, I remember sitting in my apartment. I ordered a pizza. I bought a bottle of wine. I sat in the complete dark. I watched that music video. And then, in a very dramatic way, I may say, for 3 hours straight, I listened to that song on loop. And I just like internalized the lyrics. I cried. I definitely drank that whole bottle of wine, so that wasn't helping the kind of dramatics of it all. But I was listening to that song, and there was one specific lyric from the song, which was, I kept you like a secret, or excuse me, you kept me like a secret, but I kept you like an oath. And I internalized that specific lyric so intensely because I was relating to it in a way that I wish I didn't have to. I was relating to it in the sense that I remember the first woman that I ever dated was closeted. And so we had a relationship that I was feeling very much like that lyric. I had taken an oath to her. I was being the partner that I thought that she wanted and needed, but I had to be kept a secret. So that was a lyric that really hit home for me. And I related to it in that way. I don't know why Taylor wrote the lyric. I'm not saying at all that that's why she wrote the lyric, but that's what I resonated with when I listened to that song. And I think the cultural phenomenon that is Taylor Swift is that her lyrics are so incredibly specific and yet somehow so universally relatable because we all take bits and pieces of her songs and we find ourselves in them, right? Like that's what we love about her music so much is that we can see ourselves in her lyrics. And so I was kind of thinking through that. And during my master's program, I told you I did this whole program based on art analysis. I actually had this wonderful opportunity to deep dive into her Midnights album, which came out during my fall semester of my master's program. And so, for one of my articles that I published, I ended up diving into her lyrics on the Midnights album. And what stuck out to me was a concept that I was able to pull from Oscar Wilde's 1800s farcical play, The Importance of Being Earnest. I know. How did we just jump from All Too Well to Oscar Wilde? It's because that's literally how my brain works. I'm a crazy person, right? So I grew up a theater kid, right? So I absolutely love this play, and the idea that I'm pulling out from Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest is basically this concept of living a double life. It's called bun burying. I'm trying not to get too technical with you here, but this idea of living a double life is something that I saw and heard come to fruition in one of Taylor's songs, specifically Antihero. So anyways, I write about that in the article, and I talk about the experience. I interview people who are having their own internalized interpretations of her music, and all of that in combination with these kind of deep dive conversations that I'm able to have with my fiance, who's also a huge Swiftie, who also, analyzes and interprets and internalizes her lyrics like I do. I mean, we were able to sit down in the hallway with whiteboards, literally like crazy people. I'm not even going to lie. And just like connect different things in her songs that we were like, oh my God, like this is something that we saw in our ninth grade literature class. Like, growing up. Like we saw this concept play out in Romeo and Juliet. We saw this concept play out in To Kill a Mockingbird. This is a coming of age story. Like that's what these things are. And so fast forward to probably a year later, I'm now living in Arkansas, and the actual genesis of the class was a road trip to and fro New Orleans from Little Rock. And there are long stretches where we don't have any cell service, so we're forced to talk to each other like real people. And my fiance and I are like, what do we do with all of this information that we're just talking about all the time? Like, what do we do with all these things that are swimming around in our head, and the like weirdly long documents of notes that I have in my Google Drive? And we were like, what? Wait, let's do like a class. Like, let's teach people. You don't have any experience teaching, Victoria, but like you can talk to people, so you can definitely teach. And I said, as confidently as ever, yes, I totally can. On the inside, she was not confident, ladies and gentlemen. But I ran with it, and I pitched the idea to a local bookstore. They loved it. And on actually December 13th, which is exactly a year ago today that we're recording this, Ranger, we announced the first Dear Reader class. We announced on Taylor's birthday in 2023 that we would be holding this class. And it kind of blew up very quickly, and it's taken a life of its own from there. I realize that I talk so much. I'm so sorry.
No, I just realized that today is Taylor Swift's birthday. Not realize, you just told me.
Yeah.
Which is super cute because my little sister's birthday is tomorrow, or her birthday party at least, and she's having a Taylor Swift themed birthday party. I made her invite.
Oh my gosh.
I don't want to show it on social media because I'm afraid I'll get sued. But it's like the Eras Tour poster. I made it in Canva. It's super cute.
I love that.
And I didn't realize it, but her little Amazon wish list is like Taylor Swift CDs and like pop figures, and it was super cute. I was like, oh my God,
oh my God,
you're a little dweeb.
That's so good.
I love it. And something that came up when you were talking about her lyrics was, again, my concepts, hair behind ear, of that vaguely specific, that they're just like vague enough that people can, anybody can relate, but just specific enough that it brings up a specific emotion or memory for them.
Yes.
And, my top artist for the year was Mike Posner, who he walked across the country a few years ago. And that's what I thought, what I loved about one of his albums that he wrote about walking was like, it's called Keep Going. And it was just being able to like kind of see myself in all of those songs was so interesting. And there's so many other times in other lyrics and other songs of his that I can see myself in. So I think that also does translate into a lot of Taylor's music. And when it comes to her lyrics, in terms of enrolling people into this course, like you and your fiance were able to put this together, take all of this stuff swimming around in your head and really create something unique out of it. when you were telling people
Mm-hmm.
about what you were trying to do and enrolling them in that vision, what was that process like?
Yeah, so I mean, we owe so much to, especially for that first class, Paper Hearts Bookstore. That is the independent bookstore that we partnered with for that first literature course, because they were a huge marketing help to us, right? Like we were, my fiance is a brilliant graphic designer, and so she has graciously created every graphic, every PowerPoint, literally any visual that we have put out for this class. And so we essentially gave Paper Hearts these graphics, and we said, put these on your channels, please. Like we know Swifties, but we don't know how to reach them. And essentially, like we were specifically trying to reach like a bookish community of Swifties, which going through a bookstore is the perfect opportunity for that. So we found all these people who followed the Paper Hearts page, who jumped on board because they happen to be Swifties as well. And so that is a big part of how we were able to reach them in the beginning. There are other things as well. It helps that I have a journalist background because of that, I know how to make media appearances and media connections. So, I was able to go on a few talk shows here in Little Rock. I was able to get a few coverage kind of articles from different entities here in Arkansas. The coolest experience though is that some of these opportunities started finding us, and the class kind of took on this sort of life of its own, and there would be conversation about it that would happen that we had nothing to do with. For example, this class is actually being turned into a book that is coming out in September of 2025. And the reason that even happened is because one of the articles got published in like a Reader's Weekly sort of newsletter that my now agent found in a random email newsletter. And so that is kind of an example of the ripple effect that happened because of all these, again, cross sections and intersections of communities that it reached: the book community, the Swifty community, the local communities. And then, of course, social media is a huge help as well, right? Like I have a little bit of this TikTok following. And so it helped that when Taylor actually announced the Tortured Poets Department during the sort of onboarding session of this class, I was able to start making some analyses of what we think that this album's going to be like, or what we think we're going to see in some of these songs. And that was able to uptick interest to the point that our next round of classes in the fall, we actually didn't just have national students, we had international students. So it was an in-person and an online class, by the way. So in our first round, I think we had 14 different states represented from students. And then in our second round, we had a handful of states. But then, like I said, we also had a couple of international students as well. So that was a super cool experience.
Yeah, that's so I don't know. I'm just like reeling. I just think that's such a unique, cool thing to do. Like bring people in for like such like a. I feel like a lot in coaching and in business, everybody talks about niching down and like finding your target demographic and really visualizing who they are, and that is like the nichest of niches. Like not only
Yeah.
are they super into book or literary analysis, but also Taylor Swift, also community, also these different
hmm
things. And the video of yours that I watched that you sent me from your last session of Dear Reader Lit was basically comparing, um, oh my gosh, the Truman Show to Taylor Swift and some of her performances, and really just like diving into that performance and persona that she puts on in her shows. And I don't want
Yeah.
to give away. I guess I don't want to give away all your secrets. I don't know if you're ever going to do the thing again. Maybe this will be good for enrollment too. But when it comes to that, like it's not just about her, right? Like the thing
hmm
that I got out of that was, and kind of reading some of the stories that you'd posted in your article and on your webpage about Dear Reader Lit, was we see ourselves in film, in art, in literature, in music. So I
hmm
guess what I'm curious about is like when it comes to that stage performance that she's putting on, have you noticed yourself kind of falling into that performer role when it comes to Dear Reader Lit or Hairpins or anything else? And how does that play
Oh,
into making these so successful?
interesting. Are you kind of okay? So let me say it back to you to see if
Yeah.
I'm on the same page as you right now. So you're asking if I am kind of putting on the Taylor Swift TM charm in my own sort of Victoria way. Am I being Victoria TM to make these things kind of work? Is that what you're wondering?
I think you said it a lot clearer than I did. Yes. Because I feel like a lot of
Okay.
times, kind of what we were talking about earlier, is like we are also like we have so many different aspects of who we are as a person, and really diving in on these specific aspects to bring other people into the community that we want to create. Like I think something that I've been thinking about a lot from the walk is like identity and who we see ourselves as. Like that concept of like, oh, all
Mm-hmm.
you have to do is be yourself, but there's so many different parts
Mm.
of ourself. So I think this is me asking you to give me clarity for my own self, but also people listening. But like, how does being a performer fall into or play a role in everything that you're doing?
I think that's such a good question. My goodness, Ranger, you nailed it with that one. So I am so fascinated by this concept. And my voice cracked when I said that. I am so fascinated with this concept. And again, going back to my grad program, I actually did some studies specific to performance studies, which is a lens. It's kind of a newer sort of academic lens in which you view the world through performance, pop culture, and sort of these different kind of I just lenses, I guess. And so there is this idea with that every version of ourselves that we present to different communities or different audiences at all points of the day are different performances, right? Like mini performances. You know, the way that you act in a work setting. So the way that I act when I have my badge on at the Venture Center, my full-time professional job where I'm working with entrepreneurs, although I'm still being a version of myself, I am going to be an uplifted version of myself. And it's going to be a very different version of myself than who I am when I'm at Hairpins, which is a dive bar lesbian bar night. I sure as hell hope that I'm not exactly acting the same at the Venture Center that I am acting at Hairpins. Because you better believe I'm dancing the night away when I'm at Hairpins. My God, I sound like I'm 80 when I say that. Um, but yeah, so this idea of performance and how it plays into specifically all of these kinds of different adventures that I am sort of finding myself on. Yeah, I definitely do put on. I'm trying to think here. I definitely play into a role. I do. And it's so interesting that you bring attention to that too, just because when I was working in news, a part of the reason that I am not a TV reporter and anchor anymore is because I really struggled with identity. And I really had to put on a version of myself every single day that I felt like I wasn't. I had the perfect blonde bob, and I had to wear the TV news anchor dresses that you can visualize, you at home if you're listening. I know you can picture those perfect little Barbie doll news anchor dresses. Nothing wrong with them. It's just not what I wanted to wear. I don't know if people can see this now, but I have very short brown hair, and I mostly wear men's clothing because I think it's comfortable and usually cheaper. And that kind of news anchor look that I fell into just wasn't me. It wasn't what I was comfortable with. And so I struggled with this idea of having to put on a performance for everyone, and feeling like that hindered who I was and how I was growing as a 20 something year old. And so for you to point out now that what I'm doing essentially is this version of different performances of myself is really interesting. And I think I might be having a slight existential crisis because of it. But it's different because I don't think it's a bad thing to put on a performance sometimes, in the sense that, like, sometimes when you're not feeling confident, acting confident makes you confident. You know, like there are studies that show that. I don't know the study, But there are studies that show that. I've heard people say it. I listened to a podcast myself this morning that talked about it. And so, I don't, maybe ask a follow-up question to this, because now my gears are turning, and so long answer long. Yes, I am performing to an extent of I have to fill different roles to help build these different communities, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and what's coming up for me as you're talking about this, like I'm thinking, and to be completely honest, I've never watched the Truman Show all the way through in one sitting. But
Oh
based off
wow.
of what I have seen, and yeah, I haven't seen Forrest Gump either. Let me tell you, that one's the worst. Um, Being compared to him for 6 months for the rest of my life, also. Oh my god. But what's coming up for me there is like in the Truman Show, he doesn't know he's performing. He's just being himself. And I guess
Yeah.
what because a lot of what you said resonates with me too, right? Like the way that I act with my fiance is very different than the way I act with her parents. It's different than the way that I act when I'm at a
Mm-hmm.
networking event, when I'm with my best friends, when I'm with my little sister. Like they're all versions of me, and I think that I thought of that too. Is it inauthentic to change who you are in these different circumstances? Or is it just being who I am in different regards? Right? Like is it performance, or are you just being? Like you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm hearing you loud and clear, and I just didn't know we were going to get this philosophical in our conversation, but I'm loving it. I think um you're right. Right. So it's all versions of us. I still think it's a performance, because it's a performance in the sense that you are doing something, right? Like you are acting a certain way in a certain community, and that doesn't mean that that's inauthentic, right? Like that is what we mean by performance. We don't mean performance as in like putting on, like a fake character in a theatrical show. But it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier about intersectionality and how we are just like not monoliths, and communities that we are in are not monoliths either. It we as individuals, although we might have these different kinds of things that we're with, although you might talk differently with your fiance than you do with their parents, doesn't make that version of you, or one version of you versus the other, an inauthentic version, to your point. And it's because we are these dynamic individuals who have different interests, who are different things.
Mm-hmm.
I see intersections between the hairpins community that I work with and the Taylor Swift community that I work with. I am that intersection. Like I quite literally am that intersection. There are women who I have met in Dear Reader who have gone to all of the Hairpins events. There are people who I have met at Hairpins events who I've said, hey, if you're still looking for more community, come to a Taylor Swift class. And they happen to be mild Taylor Swift fans, and then found an even greater community because of it. I can think of specific instances in both kind of directions. There are people from my reporting days who I am now working with in hairpins, or who I'm seeing in the hairpins community. And there are people from my reporting days who I know are Taylor Swift fans. And so, although you might be performing as different versions of yourself in all of them, it all goes back to intersectionality and how building community is, at the end of the day, whether it's me or whoever is doing it or whoever is wanting to be a part of it, is understanding that we're all kind of connected in some way. Truly, we are all sort of connected in some way. So, yeah, to your point, I think that's to your point. I don't have an end to my point.
I think that kind of is the point, right? That we are not these single faceted, single layer, I don't know, creatures, if you want to say that we're
Hmm.
that. I don't know what it's not just we are like we are ourselves. It's like, to what degree are we being ourselves? almost
Mm-hmm.
like the like earlier when I said like there's like that line, like the black and white thinking, like, and there's that aspect of like, there's these gray areas. It's almost making me think like there's the black, there's the white, there's the A and the B, the one and the two, the asterisk and the dollar symbol, right? Like there's more degrees of who we are as people or as individuals than just this
Mm-hmm.
one specific aspect. And I think that we could probably talk about this for maybe another episode, or maybe bring in performance and identity on another topic. But
Yeah.
just out of respect for your time and for everything that's going on, I do have a quick question for you from someone from our school community. Um, I
Oh.
got a few other questions from them, but I think we answered them throughout. So thank you to everybody that did submit questions. I appreciate it. And for those that aren't sure how to submit questions, the best way to do it are to comment or send me DMs on the Instagram and Facebook posts that I make. But the question that I have is around community and how COVID has affected kind of the Eras Tour and also people's desire to find these in person communities. So
Mm.
it's from Elliot from my school community. And he asked, how did COVID and being in lockdown affect people's desire for community? And how did that kind of play into the Eras Tour slash potentially Victoria's workshop series?
Well, lucky for you, Elliot, and everyone out there, indirectly, my master's thesis work talked about this directly. So,
Sweet. Oh, that's awesome. How cool.
yeah, I know. Isn't that a little bit crazy? So, like, quite literally, I talked about the importance of storytelling, performance, and in person, specifically in person performance post COVID, and how we sort of as a society are having this sort of renaissance of a time right now. So, like, when the Renaissance era happened, originally, it happened after a plague that basically took out thousands of people, right? And so it happened after this dark period of time, where people were hurting, they were sick, they lost a lot, and they were like really kind of in a mentally dark place. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, that's what happened during COVID. And we were so deprived of not only connection with other people, but like we were deprived of art, we were deprived of creativity, we were deprived of like all the things that we took for granted, such as getting to experience shows in person. And, if we want to continue connecting it back to the Taylor Swift of it all, people who had tickets to her Loverfest at the time, actually, those shows got canceled and we had to, stop that from happening. And so, what I specifically talked about in my thesis work was the power of in-person performance and how that like chemically changes your body. I spoke to, my goodness, now I can't remember anyone's names, but it was a professor from UT Austin who has done work in performance ethnography. And ethnography is essentially the study of a culture and of different people by immersion, right? By being with a certain culture. And this performance ethnography piece was talking about how she experienced a certain culture that she went and visited, and how she was trying to basically recreate that culture and that experience through her performance. And the people who came to that performance, how that was going to impact the way, whether they knew it or not, that they would take the bus to work the next day, for example. We don't understand that things are happening chemically in our body when we are surrounding ourselves with other people or with performance. And so, in the wake of COVID, I think that we all kind of just like understood, we understood what was happening when we weren't experiencing it, when we had that sort of separation. So now I think that we are ultra aware of what's happening when we are experiencing it, when we are having a connection with another person, whether it is in a large scale community experience like the Eras Tour and the Taylor Swift phenomena of it all, or whether we are just getting to sit inside of a coffee shop with a group of our friends, something that many of us were deprived of during that period of COVID-19. So I think that we are having such a boom and a need for community right now because we are experiencing it in a like renaissance level of like experience outwardly and in our body, I guess.
That was I wasn't expecting that when I wrote down the question earlier. That was so insanely detailed and intricate and cool, and thank you for sharing all of that. I feel like uh, once I have this recording done, I'm gonna have to re-listen to that over and over and over again. And it just reminds me of platforms like school to begin, like just how people like gravitate towards online communities, or how we're gravitating towards these clubs or groups or Dear Reader Lit or Hairpins, and like that is such a great human need. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that is something I think I need to ruminate on more myself, and maybe journal on and talk about, because now I'm thinking of all these experiences from the walk and from what I saw and what I experienced there, and how that kind of, I don't know, transpires and comes together. That was amazing. Is there, I don't know if this is allowed, but is your thesis, like, is that available for people to read, or is that like property of the university or something, or do we have to pay to see it?
I think it's available. I have never personally
Okay.
had anyone ask me to read my thesis, so thank you. No,
Yeah.
I want to say it's available. Let me do a little bit of digging and I will send something over to you. I definitely have a one single bound printed version of it that perhaps I could photocopy if I really wanted to get technical with it. But let me do some digging and I'll see if I can send that to you.
Okay.
It was a really cool experience. Yeah, and I would love for more people to talk about it because it's I actually can I ask you a question? I know that that's not how this works, but I want to.
You're gonna flip the script on me and ask me questions on my own podcast? Heck yeah, dude. What's up?
Yeah, it's that journalist in me. She lives on forever. So we're talking about this idea of creating community and like the physical kind of change that happens in us when we are surrounding ourselves with people. So now that you're sort of in the gear of reflecting on your walk across America, how do you think that that connection with other people was changed with you physically walking to their spaces as opposed to getting in a car and driving to them?
That's such a good question. I think a lot about it is just tied up in the vulnerability, right? Like, I
Mm.
didn't have really, I had some form of self protection, but at the end of the day, I was just this little flesh machine walking everywhere, right? Like, I didn't have a car to get away fast. I didn't have anything to like escape quickly or camouflage or hide myself. So I think that it was, a lot of it was just really tied up in being so open and vulnerable to everything around me. And when it
Hmm.
comes to, I guess, seeing community, was just seeing how similar people are all across the country, whether or not they were strongly Republican or extremely Democrat, or they were super straight and, never, I say super straight as if you can have beyond straight. I don't know. You know what I mean? Or that they were in the like in the LGBT community. Or like, I don't know. I think super straight also means that there's also super gay, which maybe there is. I don't know. But
Hey, it's a scale. It's a scale.
it's a scale, okay. But I think that a lot of it was just so tied up in seeing how, generally speaking, everybody that I came across with, like, there is such an innate curiosity and community within every single person, that people were willing to come up and talk to me. The people were willing to pull over and check on me, or say that they
Mm.
saw me on the news, or ask me what I was doing. Um, Invite me into their homes, invite me to camp out on their property, or offer support, or ask me to take a picture with their kid. Which, the first time that happened, I was just kind of blown away that they were willing to trust this like the joke that the homeless unemployed guy next to their daughter. Like, it was just that I think a lot of it is just so tied up in that people are innately good. And I think that
Mm.
if we had more time to focus on not just surviving in the day to day, but have time and space for curiosity, I think that that really is the key to opening up. Does that answer your question so far?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think kind of just to piggyback on that, it's this experience of having that time and that curiosity, um and opening yourself up to that opportunity. That is how you find community. That is how you find connections with other people. And so I love that that's kind of what seems to be the experience that you had, and that you're able
Mhm.
to share that firsthand now with others. It's not just the story we're reading about online, but it's like you are such a personable guy to be able to actually have that experience and share that the way you do with others. I think is really special. So, like, thank you for what you do, because it is super inspiring to what I do as well.
Well, good. I'm glad that there's that you appreciate that, and I hope it resonates with others as well. I think the biggest thing that I've noticed too is just the importance of sharing your experience. Something
Hmm.
that Gary Vee says is document, don't create. And it's just like sharing what you're going through, sharing what you have gone through. Because for like the walk, if Mark and Andrew hadn't shared their story, I might not have realized that I could do it. And I'm sure there's been plenty of people that you've inspired by sharing your story of being in the LGBTQ community in Arkansas as a, as a person trying to make a difference. Like that's inspired plenty of people that you don't even know about, that have never even told you. And I think there's so many different stories and aspects that we can share of others. But when it comes to your story, if people want to continue following along and hear more about what Victoria has in the future, and they want to be on, is there like a list that can be put on for your book, or where can they get that in less than a year? Because I want a signed copy if that's possible, please. Thanks.
I think I can make that happen for you. Unfortunately, I don't have a list yet, because
Okay.
we're still a little far out for that. But if you want to follow along, I'm super active on Instagram. So that's at Victoria A. Capek, and that's spelled ViktoriaACapek. I do post on TikTok still, same username. I have a website. Always feel free to hit me up. Seriously, do exactly what Ranger did and just reach out, because I love talking to people, clearly, and I can talk forever. So, yeah, follow along. And if you want to learn about the book, stay tuned for that. More information will be coming out, hopefully, in the next 3 months or so.
I love it. And I'll be sure to share on my socials as well as soon as I see what is going on. And I'll probably also put something in my email list to my subscribers once they come out, and all these different things. I can't wait to see what is on the horizon for you with your fiance, with Dear Reader Lit, Hairpins, and everything else. So thank you so much. And for other podcasters listening, Victoria is such a fantastic guest. I feel like this was just such a small piece of what she could have talked about. So I'm going to share it with people in my podcasting groups too. But thank you, Victoria, and all of her information will be down in the show notes. And for everybody still listening, thank you so much for your time and your attention, and for taking a part out of your life to listen to parts of our life as well. And just as my constant reminder for everybody, be sure that you share this with somebody else that it may resonate with. That is the best way for us to grow as a podcast, as a community. I super appreciate all of your time. And remember, when it comes to your life, the best is yet to come, as long as you are willing to make the decision to never peak, never quit, and never settle. Thank you, and I'll see you guys next week.